Hello and welcome back once more. In our last video we hooked up a Sass theme to our app so that we could have a nice looking layout for our blogging site moving forward. What we're going to do today is hook up some front-end routes because our application is going to have more than one page and we're going to need different URLs to go to the different pages. But before we do that, I want to talk about a little bit of refactoring that I did. I pulled the hello stuff out into an edit profile component and I put that in its own module. I did that for organizational purposes and because we're going to have kind of a profile editing page later on. I also did that because it needs to be in its own piece of state, in its own reducer. If you look on the bottom left, I have kind of what I'm calling a root reducer that uses the combine reducers function that's provided by Redux. And what this allows us to do is define a bunch of different reducers all over our application and just combine them all into one place so that we don't have to maintain one great big giant code file with all of our application state, since that would be quite a maintenance nightmare. So Redux provides this, and right now I'm just pulling in the one reducer that I have, and I'm calling that my profile reducer. Later on I'm going to need to inject a reducer that our routing packages provide for us. So let's go ahead and install those routing packages. Those are React Router and redux-simple-router. Now with those installed, let's go ahead and define the routes that we'll be using at the start here. So here I have a routes file that I made in a config folder. I'm going to import the React library and a couple of components from React Router, and as well as the hash history function, which enables us to use front-end URLs that start with the hash sign, which is really handy for single-page applications. I won't go into details, but if you're not familiar with it, you should read up on it. I am also going to import our app component, and finally I'm going to define a single route. So inside our router, which contains the history property that we're giving the hash history function to, I have my single route, which is the root URL, and it's going to render our app component. So now that we've defined what our routes are, we're going to have to feed them into the Redux simple-router. So we'll do that within our main.js. And first we're going to have to import a couple things. I'm going to need this sync history function from the Redux simple-router. Once again, I'll need the hash history function from React Router, and I'll need to pull in the routes that we just defined. I'm also going to need one more function from our Redux package, and that is the apply middleware function that allows us to wire in all sorts of different middleware packages to Redux. And it looks like I made a small mistake on my path here. So now I'm going to need to make some updates to how I define my store. So this is really just a big mashup of functions, if you want to put it that way. I'm applying the hash history function to my sync history function, and then I am applying my Redux router middleware that was defined by that to the apply middleware function. That returns a function that create store gets fed into. That returns yet another function which I feed my root reducer into. So now that I have that store defined with my Redux router stuff, rather than rendering my app here, I'm going to render my routes. Also, I mentioned that we would have a reducer from our routing packages that needs to be included here, so let's get that out of the way. That reducer is called the route reducer from Redux simple-router, and we can hook it up here just the same as any other reducer. And now our router should be all properly wired up. If we did everything correctly, our app should work exactly as it did previously. And it still does. Now before we wrap it up, there's one more thing I want to take care of. In our app component, we are currently rendering this edit profile component, and we shouldn't be. This app component should be the shell of any page that we want to look at, and edit profile is not always going to be the page that we look at. So React Router allows us to do this. So what we're going to switch this with is this.props.children, and we'll see how that comes into play in just a second. We're going to have to open up the routes file once again, and we'll yank this edit profile component out of here. And we are also going to have to add another React Router component called index route. So now what we can do is we can nest other routes inside this one, and the route that we're going to nest is called the index route, and it will be given a component edit profile. Now once again, if we've done everything correctly, there should be no changes to our app. Looks like we did make an error. It can't find config routes. And let's see why that is. Webpack says that we made a syntax error. We forgot the equal sign. Let's fix that. And now we're in business. Join us for our next video where we will add more pages to our site.